Want to talk a little bit about public service, particularly in the context of railway companies and transit companies. Recently, I found out that the Tyne and Wear Metro, in all its wisdom, has decided to once again raise ticket prices. Now, footnote here: I don't use it that much. I don't rely on it. I don't use it for work or anything like that. I'm not in full work at the moment. But ostensibly, if I were to have an interview, for example, in Newcastle, I would need it for that purpose. Um, so my viewpoint of this video is not necessarily from personal reliance. However, I have seen a lot of perspectives of people who do go through, who do rely on it as commuters, and it is not a positive picture. So it got me thinking about the general issue of the attitude a lot of these companies take, and it isn't just the Tyne and Wear Metro. I believe Southern Rail. I think that's a company. It's an operator that operates around Thameslink and South East within Greater London and the South East into Kent and East and West Sussex, I believe, and Surrey. Um, I mean, the sort of things that people have reported on that service is absolutely appalling. If it is Southern Rail, I'm not 100% sure about that. But here's my take on it. To put up prices at a time when the service is less than satisfactory is utterly abhorrent to me. Um, Bonuses for executives is utterly abhorrent to me for companies that are not offering value for money. Um, I mean, I made a video a while back about pressures in modern Britain, and I think this has to be near the top of things that cause people stress and pressure is shoddy public transport. I'm too young to know really what life was like under British Rail, and certainly the left has proposed renationalisation. I know Corbyn and McDonnell have proposed that. Certainly, there were more accidents under British Rail. If you look at the number of deadly accidents, there were a higher number of deadly accidents at that time. But in terms of actual service, I don't know how it compares. I'm too young to have had first-hand experience of that. But from the time when it became defunct in 1994, I believe. I was only 9 at that time. So um, I just think it really galled people because the average person, they're going to pay the fare because they don't want to get a fine for not paying it. So people feel powerless. They feel like we're being imposed to do something, and yet we're really not getting value for money. So they feel utterly powerless. The Tyne and Wear Metro has periodic meetings with kind of regional managers, or rather, like station managers of the busier stations. I haven't been to any yet, but clearly they're not listening because if they were, they would not be putting prices up. Very often, there are simply failed trains. Now, I understand this is a complex problem. I understand, for example, in the case of the Tyne and Wear Metro, there is an issue with old rolling stock. And I wouldn't put all the blame on the management of Tyne and Wear Metro. There is an issue also with government funding, and there's other factors. And I think both left and right are wrong when it comes to this in certain areas. So, for example, the left will often, call for wildcat strikes or demand bonuses for drivers or pay rises for drivers. Now, I think train drivers do face a lot of pressure. They have enormous responsibility. They have literally hundreds of lives in their responsibility. So I do support them getting quite a bit of money, but I don't support price rises or, excuse me, pay rises. I think their salary is something like 40,000 a year. Well, that's a lot more than nurses and police officers, who also go under a lot of pressure. So I'm not against them getting a generous salary, but at this time, getting price or pay rises just doesn't make sense to me. I know when Metro used to have this thing where they would name and shame people who didn't pay fares. Now, there are people who do it not as a kind of act of protest, but just because they can't be bothered to pay, and that's wrong. That's unfair on everyone else who does pay, and it obviously costs the company money. So I've no problem penalising them. But I do find it a bit galling that Tineware Metro take money from people for a bad service. Yeah, they're very quick to fine people. I've been in a situation where a ticket machine wasn't working. I had to catch a train. Um, and I couldn't buy the ticket from that machine, and I was willing to pay the fare from a ticket inspector, and at that time it didn't work. I can't remember what the outcome was. I can't remember if I got fined or not. But I think there should be an option for ticket inspectors to sell tickets on the service. Because if a ticket machine is not working, that's hardly the fault of a commuter who is, running late or they need to catch a train for work. Things like that I find really galling. So I mentioned the left have this issue about wildcat strikes, and have no consideration. This is certainly true in the London Underground of the unrest that it causes commuters. On the other hand, I think where Conservatives are wrong is they seem to be totally fine with bonuses for big executives. Um, you know, Despite companies not offering value for money. I mean, I think the Conservatives as a party have always been in lieu to the rich. They've always had this thing about, well, let's bash strikes, and right, there is legitimate criticism of that, but I think you're very unlikely to find a Conservative opposing undeserved bonuses for major executives. I've seen very little of that because I think fundamentally they are a party and they have a mentality that, oh, well, he or she is the executive, so we'll support them. I think that for all their talk about, and this is getting into wider ideology, for all their talk about supporting aspiration and so on, I think fundamentally the Tories do believe in a bonus culture for companies. I don't. I don't believe that. I mean, fine, if a company is doing really, really well and it's offering fantastic service, there may be an initiative to reward the people at the top who are showing that their efforts are paying off, that the company is making a big overhaul. I mean, I saw this in the NHS recently. I had a somewhat heated debate with someone, a conservative guy, who was arguing that um, these consultants who come in and get massive bonuses, I think, and massive salaries. I think one guy was making 4,000 a week. 4,000 a week for kind of risk assessment and this sort of thing, but they're not on the front line. They're not facing the sort of pressures that nurses are facing. I'm not saying the work is easy. I'm not saying that they're not under any pressure, but that's a disgusting amount of money. And I don't think you need to be a communist or a red flag carrying socialist to say that there's something fundamentally rotten about that. I mean, the pressures that young doctors and nurses are under is phenomenal, and a lot of them have taken their own lives. Although maybe I digress here. But the point I'm making is I don't think Conservatives fundamentally really care about the indiscrepancy here, about the fact that the people who are struggling on the front line, are on pretty mediocre pay, and yet consultants. Although having said that, some of these places are in Labour councils. In one case, it was a Welsh NHS trust, which was Labour run. So Labour isn't squeaky clean in this regard. Um, but fundamentally, I think that if you're providing a public service, public transport, there is absolutely no justification for raising prices if the service is not 100%. That's how I feel about it. And yes, it may not all be their fault. There's issues with rolling stock that needs to be replaced. I believe on the Tyne and Wear Metro, some of that is 30, 40 years old. But when we get updates like, oh, failed train, without them even bothering to apologise, and then they announce price rises, I think it just infuriates people. And I haven't even been through anything comparable to what regular commuters go through on the Tyne and Wear Metro or on the London Underground. I have to say, from the Sunderland side of things, it's not so bad, but North Tyneside, that branch of the line is absolutely, it seems to be delay after delay, failed train after failed train. It just seems to be a complete headache. And it's always the same story. They need to have disruption in order to upgrade the service, but they've been upgrading the service for about a decade, and it just seems that nothing is really changing, nothing is improving. So long as there is that situation, there seems absolutely no justification for raising prices, because that sends out the message that, oh well, we're not really bothering to make any changes, or at least our sole motivation is profit, and it's not. That isn't the I don't think that is the thing, but this is something that local MPs have been really had their paperwork filled up with, because it's something that really affects a lot of people. So I hope I haven't digressed too much, but summed up, I think if a company is providing some sort of public service, they either provide it 100% or they have no justification for raising prices. I do believe that infrastructure is something that seriously needs to be tackled in this country. Um, we're the world's sixth biggest economy, but our public transport system is a bit of a joke. I don't think it's the worst in the world. Probably you'll find some developing country where it's a lot worse, but that's the point. Those are developing countries. There is no excuse for our system to be the way it is. Um, I mean, I understand in Japan, if a train is 20 seconds late, managers personally apologise. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there just seems to be a kind of complacent attitude with executives in this country. I think if they personally travelled as commuters, I think they should, in fact, I think they should spend one morning travelling as commuters do, putting up with the stress, putting up with the disruption to see why people are so angry. Um, and a final point, when things go wrong, the most important thing is information. And it's a lack of information. For example, if there's a bus replacement, there needs to be communication between the bus service and the train service so that people know what's going on. And there isn't. I mean, when I had that disruption with the King's Cross power failure and I got off at Peterborough, the lack of information was telling. And I'm not blaming the individuals behind the desk for that, but it's a problem in the system. The boards weren't updated. I just think that there needs to be a situation where information greatly improves. If that's one thing, I think that would greatly improve the system. Just better information, telling people to go online to go online or get onto the smartphones. Well, not everyone has access to that. Point one, and point two, that's putting the onus on the passengers. That should be on the tannoys, clearly on the tannoys. Um, so I think that's one area this country can greatly improve. And I think it does cause a profound amount of stress, and that stress is a quality of life infraction.